you ever had a goal that just seemed impossible? If so, you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Notable Peeps podcast, a series that gives attention to remarkable people who are putting on their shoes, doing their best, and believing in the impossible.
All my dreams are coming true.
Hi, this is Jason Tuttle. I am from Atlanta, Georgia, and you are listening to the Notable Peeps podcast.
Jason, to start off, our tagline is put on your shoes, do your best, and believe in the impossible. So can you take us back to a time in your life that was challenging and how you were able to overcome it?
At my age, there are so many of them. I will probably say right after we found out my wife was pregnant with our son, and we got to the week 20 appointment, which everybody knows that's the appointment where you find out the sex of the child. And up to that point, we had no reason to believe that we had any issues, any concerns, anything. And it was from that point that we found out that there was a possibility that there was going to be a major medical issue. And from that appointment, we started seeing a perinatalogist, which is a high risk kind of OBGYN. And it was during those next couple of weeks that we found out my son was going to have areas of missing white matter in his brain, which he did. They thought that he was going to have hydrocephalus, which luckily he didn't. They said that he only had one kidney, which he did. He had the other kidney had sustained some damage, which he did. And it kind of snowballed from there. And essentially the way I got through it, once my son was born and we found out for the most part what all of his issues were, I'm a real big researcher. And so I got online and I researched his rare condition and I got on social media. And back in those days, MySpace was real big, to date myself. And I actually found someone on MySpace halfway across the country on the West Coast that actually had a child that had my son's same rare condition.
Whoa.
So it was through the research that kind of, even though it was still difficult and it was trying, it at least got me through those moments, because then I could start figuring out, well, what are the issues? What are the primary issues? What are the secondary issues? What do we need to start doing from here?
And that's a lot that you guys had to take in, where you're just going, like you said, normally to that appointment, and then it just snowballed from there. So can I ask you a little bit about what Zachary was like?
Sure. Well, he was born with a rare condition called Eagle-Barrett syndrome. It was 1 in 40,000 births at the time he was born. He was born with severe neurological delays. Because of his neurological delays, he developed epilepsy, meaning he had seizures. He was nonverbal. He could walk with assistance, but like to walk on his own, no, he needed a wheelchair for that. But even though he was nonverbal, like I could ask him yes, no questions, and he would kind of make sounds as if to say yes or no. And there were differences in those kind of sounds and tones that he would make based on what he wanted. He was very much a child that never met a stranger. He wanted to meet everybody. He unconditionally loved everybody. Like, he wanted to give everybody that crossed his path a hug. He had an oddly specific a sense of comedic timing, although he could not tell time. So, I mean, despite the hard life he lived while he was around with all of his medical issues, he was probably the most laid back child I've ever been around. Around January of 2022, towards the end of it, about the 25th of that month, my son got what we thought was kind of a 24-hour virus. We didn't think much about it. Well, after everything was said and done, from the time that we found out he had a virus until the time that he was pronounced in the hospital, it was 36 hours. It was very fast. It was unofficially, I think it was gastroenteritis, that he got an infection in one of his intestines, and we just didn't catch it fast enough. By the time we caught it, it was well in its progression, and it turned into sepsis, and that sepsis got to his bloodstream. And then once that happened, it caused cardiac arrest, and he passed away.
Thank you for sharing that about him, because like what you're saying too, of even though he wasn't, like, communicating with words is so true that, like, parents really know, like, their kids, even as a, like, infant, like, that cries different or whatnot, that, like, you get to know, like, what they need.
Certainly. And I got to a point to where I've gotten very good at reading nonverbal cues and body language. And, my wife hates it because, when something's on her mind, I can look at her and go, well, what's going on? Well, nothing's going on. I said, yes, there is. It's written all over your body language. What's going on? That kind of things. And, I still use that to this day.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that that helps you in so many situations because people don't always realize their
Mm.
nonverbal cues that they're putting out there.
Certain.
So, but like I do appreciate you sharing more about Zachary and just about grief in general. For me, like grief has always been a topic that, and I've interviewed more people over the years, but that it's like always that fear of, am I going to ask the wrong question or not be sensitive? Because it's such a hard thing, especially losing a child.
It is, and the longer you get in this journey, even though the weight is still heavy, you learn how to carry it. You learn how to deal with it. And honestly, I will say online, sometimes it just depends on my mood when someone asks me some of the questions that I typically get asked. But, I'll joke with people and say, just because you say their name or ask about grief doesn't mean I'm going to sit there and go, all of a sudden go, like I'm realizing like he's no longer with me at this point and I'm 4 years into the journey. And so, I tell people, I call non-grievers outsiders, if you will. I tell outsiders all the time, I don't think because ask about our child that's deceased, that we've forgotten that they're deceased. In fact, a lot of times we want to talk about our child, about the good times. And if you really want to know about the harder times, most of this will give you more information than you ever wanted. A lot of us have no problem talking about it. Society tells people it's like people that haven't lost someone, society tells you need to do something, but the reality is you don't force yourself to say someone who's lost something if you feel like it's going to be something that may be out of line, I guess is what I try to tell people all the time. We understand that you're trying to be sensitive and you're trying to say the right things, and the reality is grief is just tough. I mean, it's the nature of the beast that it is. But, if you're checking in with us and you're, genuinely concerned, that's great and wonderful, but you don't necessarily have to say something if you really feel awkward about it.
Well, and I think that that's good advice too, because like what we were talking about with the cues before, people can sense if you're feeling awkward about it
Mhm,
too or not sincere.
mhm,
I'm curious though, like the grief groups online,
mhm.
how did you know to like go online for a grief group? Like, was that suggested to you, or did you just like start Googling?
Well, I've always been a big user of social media, and
Uh-huh.
I joke with people all the time that Facebook has a group for everything.
Oh, for
And
sure, for sure.
And so after my son had passed and some time had gone by, I initially looked for just general grief groups, and there's 1,000 of them on there. And then after I found a lot of those groups, for me as a man, I wanted to find a group where I could find men that were active in a grief group, maybe not experience exactly what I had, but at least in the ballpark of what I had experienced, just so that I could bounce things off of. In a lot of these grief groups, no matter their size, almost 100% of them are 0.8% are women in those groups. There's probably
Oh.
0.2% that are men. And of those men that are in there, most of them are lurkers, meaning they'll read everything, but are they active? No. And one of the other pushes is the reason why I created all my stuff with Letters to Zachary was because I was getting frustrated with the fact that I could get into these groups, and even to this day on my stuff, men are a part of it, but I cannot get them to be active in those groups. And I'm coming out going, hey, if you need me to be the guinea pig, I'll be the guinea pig. If you need to see that it's okay to be vulnerable, especially in a social media setting, then I'll be that guinea pig. But and I can't get them to open up. So, my first natural instinct after everything was just to search on Facebook. And the group that I actually posted my first journal entry in was a group that dealt with parents who had lost a special needs child is where I first posted that. And I was actually surprised to find it because that's such a niche area of grief that I was surprised I found it. Letters to Zachary was my son passed away, and then for about a year and a half, I grieved very intensely because I was the stay at home parent. I was the caregiver. I did all the physical, medical stuff. Anytime he got admitted to the hospital, I was there from the moment he got into the moment we left. So I did all of that. And once I finally got to a point to where I felt like I could start talking about it through the process, before then I started journaling. And one day I got this idea in one of the grief groups that I was in online. Asked one of the admins, I said, "Do you mind if I post one of my journal entries?" And her response was, "Yes, we would love for you to, because we so rarely get men in here willing to open up about just emotion and grief and loss and death. We'd love to hear your response." And so I did. And from that first letter, I got a massively positive response. Like, I was kind of stunned at the response I got because wasn't sure how people were going to react to it. And I'm the type of person that in my personal and real life, I don't typically sugarcoat things. I'm very real. I wouldn't say I'm not rude about it, but I'm real. I'm upfront. I'm a lot of times can be raw about especially things emotion related. And I got just a huge response from that. And it was from that point I started posting letters just in various different groups. And after several weeks of it, in my head, I kind of went, I think I've got something here. I want to start building on this. What do I need to do? And it was from that point that I created a Facebook page called Letters to Zachary. And once that started gaining steam, I went from a Facebook page to a Twitter account to an Instagram page to a TikTok account to now I have a professional website and I'm published, and it's just kind of blown up over the last 2+ years.
You said that you were sort of surprised at how people reacted. Like, were you just in these letters telling, like, Zachary what was going on in your day-to-day life, or
So
what was it about?
the story behind the first letter was, let me backtrack just a little bit. Throughout this whole time, I'm a big proponent of therapy or counseling, whatever people want to call it. And it was my counselor at the time that said, "Have you ever thought about journaling?" And my response that I said then that I can now kind of go back and laugh about is the fact that she asked me that, and I said, I don't know if I'm a really good writer. I don't know if that's kind of my thing. And so she said, we'll put it on the back burner. She said, you can come to it at any point in time. Journaling is more about getting it off your shoulders, getting it off your chest. So it's just not sitting on you. And as the story goes, I was watching a Facebook reel one night, somewhere in that grieving period. And I don't remember what was on the reel, but something in there reminded me of my son. And it hit me hard. Like I was doubled over, just emotional. And I just uncontrollable, kind of emotionally speaking. And I got through that moment and I just opened up a Word document and I essentially just in proper letter writing form, I, dated it Dear Zachary, and I wrote how I was feeling about, the loss of him and what was going on and just kind of my feelings in the moment and just real, raw, guttural, this is what's going on. This is what I'm thinking about this situation in the moment. And that's what I posted. So when I posted it in the group, like I even put a disclaimer out above it, just because even in grief groups, you still have people that get triggered, if you will, if they start reading something related to what they've dealt with. And so I essentially just said, hey, this is a very real, honest, in the moment letter that I've written to my son. If this is something that you cannot handle, please scroll by because I'm not going to sugarcoat this. I've always been a proponent that people need to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly of grief. And grief, at least in the beginning stages, is very ugly. It's very difficult. It's very tough. And, if I felt like, in fact, if I remember that first letter that I posted, there were a lot of F bombs in there. And like I told people, I said, if I felt like in the moment that I wanted to drop an F bomb because that's how I was emotionally feeling, then that's how I wrote it. And I think the reason why it resonated so much with people because it was very upfront and honest. It wasn't necessarily in your face, but it was, we live in a world that people are so guarded about by saying what they truly feel for fear of the blowback that they're going to get. And I'm a proponent of this is my situation. This is how I'm dealing with it. This is how I'm feeling. If you don't like it, that's fine. To be honest with you, I don't care because I'm dealing with this. You are not. And that's kind of the mindset I had when I wrote it.
And I agree with you that people don't want to be honest because of the blowback of things. But obviously, your honesty, like you said, other people could relate. How have the letters evolved? I guess I'm asking.
They have evolved in the sense of that intense emotion and just despair. No. Are there still emotion in it? Yes. I tell people all the time, one of the biggest things that grievers have to overcome is this idea that there's some sort of finish line. A lot of society thinks once I get to a certain point that it's like it's over, I'm okay, I can move on. That's not the case at all. Now it has evolved into I do my best to try to, give people hope on this grief journey. However, for me, some of the like I've dealt with depression for 25 years now, so I have to overcome that on top of the grief. And then because of the fact that I was in the ER trauma room as they were working on him until the moment that he was pronounced, I have PTSD from it.
Yeah.
So there are times, and I tell people on my page and followers all the time, I try not to be negative all the time, but sometimes with just the personal obstacles I have to overcome to create content, sometimes that comes out more than it probably should. But I do tell people all the time that, there is light at the end of the tunnel. Sure, you'll still have dark moments throughout probably the rest of your lives, but it won't be all darkness like what it is in that first, month, 3 months, 6 months, year is what I try to tell people.
Yeah, and I really liked what you said that like grief isn't a destination. It's not like at some point you've passed that finish line. I appreciate you saying that, and that does make sense that there's something for everyone out there. Social media, and I was thinking about what you were saying though with the men, because when I was reading your post about what you're doing, how you're passionate about getting men to open up, like what's your advice to these guys who are dealing with grief?
Well, two of my kind of side things that I do with Letters of Zachary is one is trying to reach out to men about opening up for me it's grief, but it can pertain to any emotion, as well as teaching or explaining to women what men what hurdles men have to overcome to just grieve in today's world. Is what I are the two kind of the side projects I do. For men, it's interesting. Typically, men, they want to see someone else do it first to see that it's okay, and then men will jump on board. And so that's what, like, the way I said just a second ago was like, if I need to show men that I can be the guinea pig, and, if someone wants to get onto me because I'm opening up online, that's fine. They can do that. That does not bother me. And so I've said multiple times online, I'm just like, look, if you need to see someone that's doing it to see that you are okay, that it's not going to take your man card away because you're opening up about a God given emotion about the most devastating thing a parent can go through, then look no further because here I am. You know, you got to drown out all of the noise out there, people telling you it's not okay for you to do this. I typically will tell man, if you don't, how do I want to put it? Look, am I asking other men to come to me and cry on my shoulder? No, that's not what I'm asking. But what I'm saying is I'm trying to make an environment on all of my pages and say, look, here are the rules. Anybody that comes in here that tries to chastise you for your emotions or tell you that you're wrong or that you're not grieving right, I said, I've already told people, I said, you will get booted without question, with no questions asked, because there are 1,000 different ways to grieve, because we all have different variables related to our grief. And so those are the parameters I've set up for all of my pages. And if you don't want to come online, you can see a therapist, you can see a counselor if you're into that. You know, for men, it's a lot of the non-traditional. If you're working with a buddy on a car in a garage, that's just as good as being online. If you're going to a sports bar watching a game, that's just as good as being online. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be in front of a crowd. It can be you and someone that you really trust as another guy, if that's kind of the dynamic that you have with that other person. And so I try to give them more non-traditional ways to be able to being a setting to where they can open up is what I try to tell them the most.
And I'm curious because you had said before that a lot of this work is to help them remove those barriers to open up.
Mhm.
What do you feel like are the biggest barriers that men face?
Well, I'm 49, so I'm Generation X. And
Uh-huh.
I always grew up as the rub some dirt on it and walk it off kind of generation. I was always taught that sure you can have your emotion and you can express it, but it needs to be short, sweet, to the point, and then you need to get back to whatever you're doing, your role is as a man. And even in today's world, a lot of men are judged based on what they can physically produce and bring to whatever situation they're in, whether it's being married in a family or a significant other or something to that effect. And when a man is emotional and broken and not being able to do that, then a man, based on even today's standards, is not an effective or successful man. And so we have to get over those hurdles. Now, if they're doing it long term, that's a completely whole different ball game. Meaning, if they're secluded, not going out and doing anything, and not being social, and that's a whole different thing. But after a reasonable amount of time, men should have a reasonable amount of time to be able to grieve, more so than the 3 bereavement days that work gives us. Because work basically says, sure, we'll give you 3 days, but after those 3 days, you've got to come back like nothing has happened and get back to work like you're supposed to, when in reality, grief doesn't work that way. Grief will be the rest of your life. And so we have that. And then and within the last 6 months, you know, I hear some of the younger generation of women that will say, well, I want a sensitive man, but I don't want too sensitive of a man. And then when they are sensitive, like what the women want, those women then come back and ridicule those men for being the very thing that they wanted. And so for a man, we go, as simple as it sounds, we go, well, tell us what you want and we'll do that. And so when a lot of those men do that, and then you come back and ridicule us for doing the very thing you wanted us to do, you know, the rule of thumb for men is most men are pretty simple and we like it that way. We don't want, life is already complicated enough before adding some of this stuff on it. And so, men, if you want me to be open and I'm open to you, and then you ridicule me about it, a lot of men have kind of the baseball rule, the 3 strikes and you're out. And if I'm open to you, like my wife, and she ridicules me about it, I won't say anything to her, but I will note that in my head. And once we get to that point of she's done it that many times, I'll just get to a point where I'm just not going to open up anymore. Because why would I want to if all you're going to do is chastise me about opening up? And so there's things like that. And when I talk to women about how men share their emotion, I always preface it with, now, when I say these things, this is not a personal attack. Please do not take it that way, because the things that I say to women, I go, I have heard this from a lot of different men. And I go, first thing first, as a woman, when you are asking me about my problems or my issues or my emotions, you have to listen and not listen to respond, period. What I mean by that, is if I'm talking to you and you wait for that moment for me to catch my breath and you then insert yourself into it and say how what my emotion is doing to you and how it's affecting you when I'm trying to get out what you're asking me to get out, all you're mentally telling me is my emotions don't matter. That I will
Mm.
always be secondary to you, that you will always come first, and that why would I want to open up to you if what I'm telling you is being downplayed? If you expect me to, like when you come to me to vent to me and you expect me to sit there and listen 100% until you're finished, then I expect the same thing from you in return. That's how it has to be. If you want me to have the open up just as much as you are to me, that's how it has to be. Now, are there times that it varies? Sure, but overall, it's got to be that way. I t- I tell women, I said, look, 99.9% of men want to provide for you. It's just ingrained in us. If we come to you, if we finally get to the point where we feel like something is so important that we open up to you about it, especially if your significant as other is someone that doesn't really open up, by God, you better listen because if you sit there and downplay it, they're not going to open up to you again. A lot of men feel that way, overwhelmingly feel that way. And so I hate to say I hate to say it's a, you've only got one shot, but there are a lot of men that feel that way because they, through past relationships throughout their lives, that's how they were always treated. Men have just gotten to a point where they're just tired of it. And so, uh, eh, there's a lot of other things that I tell women all the time. And I'm just, you know, men hold things in a lot of the times because we are taught from birth that we need to compartmentalize. We can have emotions, but a lot of times we've got to push it off to the side and keep doing what we're doing to either work or provide for the family or something to that effect.
Yeah, and everything that you're saying, I think it's always good to have that other perspective, but also as you're talking about, if someone like male or female, although I feel like ladies open up a lot more most of the time, comes to you and, and opens up with like their feelings and their concerns and their thoughts, whatever it might be. I loved how you said, you better listen, you better not take it as just nothing big because that is a big deal, and I it's cool because hearing you talk, you're so passionate about this. So I'm curious, were you passionate about helping men, before you were doing the Zachary letters, or did that all sort of come around the same time?
That part of it kind of came around the same time, but I have always been very open to whether in person, on social media, you name it. I hate to take such a blunt stance about it, but I don't know if there's any other way I can explain it. But if someone doesn't like my stance because I'm open about something, I don't care. I mean, because I'm the one in the middle of whatever my situation is. I'm the one dealing with it. I'm the one that's got the firsthand experience of dealing with it. And if I get out onto the other positively get out on the other side, unscathed about it, then that's a possibility down the road that I can help someone else get through either that or a similar situation. And, it's all about, by profession, for years I was an educator. And so if I can teach someone down the road how to kind of help them get through a similar situation, then that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I love it. No, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. And I guess I want to wrap up with one
Okay.
last question
Okay.
and and tying it all together, um, for someone who is just feeling overwhelmed, and it could be with anything, right? And it feels just like that impossible, like we talked about at the beginning. Like, what's your advice for them to take it? Because, like, I think sometimes when you have hard things like in life happen, like, how do you really get through the day to day? Like, what's your advice to them for that?
Well, since grief is my topic, I would, for those people that I run across that they're just newly introduced into it, My stance is a little different on it. It's not polished. May not even be eloquent, but like I will tell them, yes, it sucks. Yes, this life is terrible. Yes, you're going to have incredibly difficult times, and that's okay in the beginning. If you want to spend that first month, 6 months, year being reclusive and not talking with family and friends so you can preserve your mental health through this really difficult time, that is okay. There is no, so long as we are not hurting self or others, there are no wrong ways to deal with grief or great emotion. Whatever gets you through the day to day. If all you did was got up and took a shower and went right back to bed and that was your day, that is okay, especially early on. But after a certain point, I tell people, when you get into something like grief, essentially you're thrust in the dark. And if you've ever gone from a very bright room to a very dark room, you know that it's confusing and you can't see even in the dark and your eyes have to refocus. And I tell people in those first several months, that's the point in which your eyes are refocusing on the dark. And then once you get adjusted to it, then you can start to kind of move around and feel around for what your surrounding is. And, I tell people in all sorts of senses of great emotion is, once you get your sense about you and you can kind of figure out how to move around in the dark, even if that step forward is millimeter by millimeter, it is still forward. And after a certain amount of time, when you finally get to the point where there's a little bit of light there, you may turn around and realize you've moved farther forward than you ever thought you could. And so I tell people all the time, even if it's the most minute step forward, you are still moving forward. And over time, it will get a greater and greater distance to where you will be, when you finally do get into the light, you'll realize you've moved a lot farther than you thought you ever could.
That's powerful. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with that. And to those of you who've listened to this conversation, I also want to thank you for tuning in. And just a reminder to continue to put on your shoes, do your best, and believe in the impossible.
All my